I'm Kevin Anderson. I am the intern pastor here at Love of Christ Lutheran Church. And as we enter the first Sunday of Advent, we're going to take a closer look at our Old Testament text for this coming Sunday, which is coming from the 33rd chapter of Jeremiah. Just some reminder background on Jeremiah. Jeremiah was a prophet. He was an Israelite priest who is in the southern kingdom of Judah, and he is going to be around when Babylon will come and overtake the southern kingdom, and Israel, the southern kingdom, will be in exile. And so Jeremiah was commissioned by God, as we'll read here in just a minute, and Jeremiah had a voice from God, a sense from God that it was time to collect his prophets, his prophecies, his sermons, writings, etc. And so he hires someone to put this all together. And so the book of Jeremiah, you get some history and prophecy, and you get kind of this mashing of his life and his work together. And so that's kind of how the book reads. And Jeremiah is a major prophet, and that distinction is made purely in the length of the book, not in the content of the book itself, as all the prophets are pointing God's people back to God. And Jeremiah's call and commission is captured in the first chapter, and just a brief snippet here of what is Jeremiah going to do. And verse 10 tells us, "See, today I appoint you over nations and over kingdoms, to pluck up and to pull down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant." And so already we see in the first chapter of Jeremiah's message is going to have judgment, but there's also going to be the sense of hope, to build up and to plant. And that's kind of what we get in the 33rd chapter coming up for this first Sunday in Advent. Just kind of some context on the 33rd chapter. In chapters 26 through 29, we hear of Jeremiah being rejected by Israel's leaders. He is begging Israel to turn back to God, and he is telling them that Babylon is going to come and take over if they do not. And Israel's leaders, chief priests, do not listen to Jeremiah. In fact, they want to kill him for the message that he's bringing. And then right after chapter 33, we get chapter 34 through 45, and we hear stories of the siege and destruction of Jerusalem as Babylon indeed comes. And so chapter 33 is kind of nestled between these stories of chaos. We have rejection, we have threats against Jeremiah's life, siege and destruction, all kinds of bad things happening. And yet, even in the midst of that, we hear this message of hope for Israel's future, which is a profound message in the midst of the chaos that is ensuing for Jeremiah personally and for all Israel, the southern kingdom, of what's happening to them. And you can kind of think of the message of hope that we're going to hear here in a minute, connected back to Moses' prediction that Israel was going to break the covenant with God and go into exile. But Moses also brings the message that God would not abandon God's people, that God was going to renew God's covenant with them, and God was going to transform their hearts. And you can look to Deuteronomy chapter 30 for that reminder. But let's take a closer look at the text. "The days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will fulfill the promise I made to the house of Israel and the house of Judah. In those days and at that time I will cause a righteous branch to spring up for David, and he shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In those days Judah will be saved, and Jerusalem will live safely. And this is the name by which it will be called: the Lord is our righteousness." Now, there's a lot going on in this little section of text. The first thing we hear is this promise being fulfilled. And the question is, what promise? Well, there's a few. One is captured in 2 Samuel. We're kind of looking through chapters 7 to 16. God promised King David that his throne and his lineage would endure forever. And so this branch language, this promise that is going to be fulfilled through this branch, is connected to King David. Now, if we look at Jesus' genealogy in Luke chapter 3, where our gospel is going to come from, the book of Luke, and if we look even at Matthew chapter 1, we get how Jesus is connected to King David. And it's important because it is a reminder, as it's a reality, I should say, that the Messiah, the one who is coming to fulfill God's promises, is going to be connected to King David and God's promise to him. There's also this promise that the law is going to be written on God's people's hearts, not just on stone. And we get this beautiful language also in Jeremiah, that I will be their God and they will be my people. So God's promise is going to come through this branch. And again, it's connected to that 2 Samuel. And this is language that we kind of hear from other prophets as well. If we look at Isaiah 11, a shoot will come from the stump of Jesse. And so even though this tree of Israel is going to be chopped down in the book of Isaiah, a stump is going to shoot out a branch of hope. And so this is all pointing to the Messiah and what is going to happen. And Christians understand this branch specifically to be Jesus. And so the prophecy echoes God's covenant to be with God's people, to write the law on their hearts, to deliver them from whatever circumstances that they find themselves in. And it's going to come through this branch. And this branch is going to be a future descendant of David, who's going to embody God's righteousness and lead with justice. And these are interesting things for us to think about. What is God's righteousness and what is God's justice? Well, we have to look to the person of Jesus to begin to answer those questions. And if we're being honest, we don't always get the kind of justice that we want when we think of God. If we think of the parable of the laborers with Jesus, we had some laborers who worked all day, some worked half a day, and some worked at the end of the day, and they all got paid the same. That's not fair. And is this God's justice? How is this going to work? Well, if we continue in Jeremiah, we hear this language that Judah will be saved and Jerusalem is going to live in safety. And that points to the direct reality of Jeremiah and the southern kingdom, is that one day liberation from Babylon is going to come. And we also have Jerusalem, the spiritual heart, right? The temple, the place where God is, that is going to be safe. And so this language of safety is coming in a physical and a spiritual form. And what's interesting is the naming by which all of this is going to happen. And the text says it's going to be named by the Lord is our righteousness. And there's some debate about what it is, and we look to the text. And is it Jerusalem? Is it the righteous branch? How is this going to happen? What is going to be applied to it? What is it in the text? And if we think about Yahweh being our righteousness, it kind of takes the agency out of humans' hands a little bit, right? It's not going to come through our behavior, our good actions, our right beliefs, but it is God who is our righteousness, God's very self. And if we think about that in terms of Jesus, the Messiah is the one who is going to make us righteous. It is God's own action that creates right relationship with God. It's a gift, freely given. And in the naming of this action that's going to happen through the Lord as our righteousness, we see a binding of the Lord and people. And this is pointing to the reality that the Messiah, who is going to embody God's righteousness and lead with justice, is the binding of God and God's people. It is the bringing together of broken relationship. And so we are left to wrestle with what is God's righteousness and God's justice, and how is that present in the world? Who does it? Where does it come from? What does it mean? Those are questions that I think we have to look to Jesus to begin to answer and understand. So blessings to you as we approach our first Sunday in Advent, as we come to worship.